you're not a cuckold at that point
No.
because you're just
Not
completely
yet.
out of the room.
Not
You're not
yet.
even listening.
Okay, so I posed this question to you the other day, and I kind of wanted to have you elaborate on it. Do you think it is more beneficial, like all the social media and everything? Do you think it is more beneficial to the government that all of that exists? Or do you think it makes them harder to do their job and to keep shit like under wraps? Like, are they happy about the internet? Like, is the benefit outweigh the cost?
I still think that it's a pro government thing just because there's so many. You're bombarded with so much information coming from both sides and just everywhere that it kind of muddies the waters on something that happens. Like you'll see 10 people be like, here's a video of it, this is exactly what happened. And then you'll see 10 people who are like, well, this is an inaccuracy and this was cut up and this was a doctored video. So you get a little bit of like, you're like 60% sure that it's going on. When before, like when you just saw everything in the paper that it was just like you're dead to rights.
Yeah.
I think you were a little bit more decided then, but now even regardless of which side you're on, you get inundated and you get bombarded with both opinions, but one opinion sounds a little bit hokier than the other one. Like you're able to deduce it, but there's still that little bit of time when you think, well, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm looking at this the wrong way?
Okay, the other thing too, kind of leading into what we're going to talk about, is things like this are only known about not because they released the information or they came out and they're like, hey, just to let you guys know in transparency, we're doing this or we did this. This shit only comes out when somebody like steals information or is able to like Watergate type shit.
A lot of that, and then a lot of FOIA requests to try to get a hold of things. But even a FOIA request, just because you request that information doesn't mean that you're going to get it. So some of it, and we'll talk about like the release of the MLK shit. And
When you told me, because you've actually, this name has been brought up. Like since we started, kind of this was kind of always on your like list.
Anything shady government, I pretty much.
I never looked into what it was, and I was like, "Is this like a fucking like phone company scam, or was this some like
It
some
sounds
type
kind of.
It does. It sounds like COINTELPRO, serving your family." It does. It sounds like a fucking phone plan or a phone company.
Yeah.
And it's not even, god damn it, it's not even, it's horribly like unclever. It's lazy. Like we had Operation Midnight Climax and they're just like, well, this is the counterintelligence, isn't it? Counterintelligence program. That's it, right?
Yeah, just COINTELPRO. Just you
And
cut off the last.
it's COINTELPRO.
You cut off like the last 5 letters of every word, and then you're there.
You couldn't fucking name this thing something else.
It kind of sounds to me. It sounds like a '70s video game. Like
No, it does. But I guess that also one program being essentially fueled by LSD having an awesome nickname or an awesome name just in itself. And then these guys being just like, we're just going to fucking spy on everybody.
your creative brain kicks in and you get a better name.
That's probably why they made it sound like this. So if it ever came up, they were like, oh, it's just the government's phone plan.
Yeah, could be. I think kind of a longer answer to your internet good or bad for the government. I think it's almost worse for companies. Just you learn little facts about different things.
So like private companies.
Yeah,
Okay.
because this was something that I learned on the internet, and unfortunately, I guess fortunately, unfortunately, I'm happy that it happened. But I kind of learned it through Kanye, and there's like a ripple effect when shit like this happens, where even if he's not signed to your company or the person that's causing the issues isn't signed to your company, you get ricochet shots left and right. And I saw something the other day that shocked me that I didn't really know. And after Adidas dropped Kanye for the anti-Semitism shit, then all these other companies started getting shots thrown at them. Like, well, Adidas did this. There's other companies in this country.
Oh,
that
it's like when they
help
put a
support the
company down there
Nazis.
like, hey, what do they say, looking at you?
Hey.
Or something. There was a thing that just happened where I think a real estate agent in like Texas had started sending this like hateful like shit toward. I don't even know if it was like an elected official. It might have been. I'm not sure, but like was threatening his family, was threatening to come after him, and then used his actual just regular number. And he looked it up, and he was listed in like the MLS, like Texas real estate. And they found him. He's like, "You realize I'm forwarding this to the FBI because you've threatened my family." And he talked about his like his two. He named the like that he had kids and shit. But
it's just crazy that nobody understands that. And even on like a more macro level, like I didn't realize that Coca-Cola was tied in with the Nazis. Mm-hmm. Look at that bottle. They made that. That's an actual Coke bottle in the shape of a swastika.
Wait, what do you mean? That's
Coca-Cola.
That's the bottom of the bottle?
That's the like some of the advertising that they used to do. It was literally on a swastika over in Germany.
Okay, what am I looking at though? Am I looking at like
it's like a sign, like a window hanger or something like that. But it says Coca-Cola was a major presence in Nazi Germany, even though officials in the Reich were said to believe that the stuff was too frivolous for the German character. Nevertheless, the American nature of the product, wealth, flashy dreams, appealed too much to the German public, and the stuff was kept around. It wasn't until 1942 that the company's presence in the nation was seriously threatened. They had bottling plants over in Germany that they kept through that.
A worldwide company. Listen, man, like we'll do companies. Have we done any companies yet?
No.
We did kind of like Hearst Empire.
A little bit. But even shit down his vein, like MGM was a major player. They would make films and they would cut the word Jew out of movies that they sent over there just to appease the Nazi party.
It's the same thing that they do for...
I guess they do it in China still, huh?
They American made movies have to take into consideration stuff about... that's not going to offend China because it's such a huge market. They do that with like, what movie was that? They got it. They're doing what they got to do, I guess.
General Motors, though, 1935, GM built a factory in Berlin for the purpose of building Blitz trucks for the Wehrmacht,
the German military.
Oh, is that what that word means?
The Wehrmacht, yeah.
It seems like army's a lot easier to say. Military is really easy to say, but.
That's the German name for it at that time, I guess.
You think Germans have really good oral? Just because their tongues have to move around their mouth so much when they speak?
I mean, our tongues move around quite a bit, don't they?
They do.
Our lips and our mouths move a little bit, so I think that it's the same shit. I think...
When you're speaking German, though, it just seems like it's a lot of... and a lot of... and...
That's just your tongue pressing on stuff. I don't know. Oral. That would be... There's got to be a poll out there that's like what nationality, due to the complexity of their language, statistically gives the best oral pleasure, or something like that. That's, you know what, the internet has found that out, and I'm going to tell you right now, that's information has been researched since like the 90s. You're gonna find an article from the 90s and be like, oh, we already figured this out. The first thing they did when the internet came out was like, let's start getting some information here. That's
how they found out that French was the language of love, because they're just really good at eating box. Right. You know a guy who may not have been great at eating box, but also really hated
everybody?
Yeah. Man's name was J. Edgar Hoover. I don't know if he's any relation to Herbert Hoover, but this guy plays a massive role in our story today.
The name, like J. Edgar Hoover, the name is so... I'm trying to think. Just... It's not synonymous with anything. What am I looking for here? It's so like etched in American kind of history that you learn about or that you hear about just through like social media or like popular culture, things like that. That you'd swear he was not just the director of the FBI.
You think he was more popular than Herbert Hoover?
I'm saying he's more well known than... I'm saying people make the mistake of sometimes mistaking him for being the president.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, J. Edgar, you think is more popular than Herbert? Because I do.
I don't know, more popular is the right term, but more well known.
If you say Hoover, it's like vacuums, J. Edgar, and then Herbert third.
Yes. If not J. Edgar Hoover for me, then Hoover vacuum, then...
I wonder if they were related.
It was nepotism at that time, wasn't it? It was all nepotism. Like, we're going to talk about when Kennedy's the fucking president, and then who's the attorney general? It's his fucking brother.
RFK. There's a lot of weird kind of crossover and stuff in this. It's funny when we talk about all the crossover that you see in, like in Europe, as far as different areas that we talk about that are in different things.
Is there stuff on the little board too?
No, it's from last week.
Oh, okay.
But like we talk about in Europe, like Alexander the Great crosses over into multiple stories and into Egypt and into all these different areas. America does a lot of that too, except for they're in smaller sections because they're presidents, and so the max they can go is 8.
Here's the difference I'm kind of finding out is that like all of the things that happened in like ancient, what you would consider like ancient times for like Alexander and all these people, like the pharaohs crossing over, and then Caesar and Cleopatra and all that shit kind of being around the same time, is all like the well-known people here in America are like assholes. It's like the bad.
I think there's a few, even the good players in this story. Like I'm a very big fan of LBJ. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I like him necessarily because of all of his policies,
like
but yeah,
and his brother.
I like LBJ because we'll have to do a presidential episode. But him and Jumbo, I've told you about Jumbo.
No.
LBJ had a nickname for his dong because it was so big, I guess.
Oh, that's right.
And he would take like pressers and shit like that in the bathroom. Mm-hmm. Like he would just walk into the bathroom while the press was following him, and he would never close the stall door. Or he'd like pony up to the urinal and drop his pants to his ankles and just bare ass the entire media. He just.
Why would the press be following him in there?
Well, if they're following him around the White House and they're having like
so
doing
not like
an interview.
active press, like someone just doing a current interview at the time.
And he just gets up during an interview. You made it sound like
there's a press corps in there being like, Mr. President, Mr. President.
LBJ once told 2 Secret Service guys that were down there keeping an eye on him in Texas on his ranch. They asked him, or they told him that he needed to be careful for rattlesnakes as he was turned around pissing in the desert. Mm-hmm. And he goes, son, once these rattlesnakes catch a peek of this, they'll be running the other way. Like, he was just that dude. And he did great things for civil rights, I think, but he plays kind of a rough, darker part in this.
People are complicated, man. People are very I don't think there's any truly black and white people. I think everyone, maybe a few, but I think people primarily exist in the gray. It's just to what degree of gray you are.
And it's kind of like we were talking about off air the other night about the corruption that you see in politics and in Congress and all that. And you know that there's people that are putting money in pockets and they're standing up for things mostly because they're getting paid for it. This is kind of like you see kind of the dirtier side of people as far as...
You see what happens when the wrong people pretty much get to have unchecked power.
Absolute power.
That's what it is. Like the people that are supposed to be watching these people are just kind of buying the bullshit story they're telling them and just approving all this because they're probably also able to make it sound beneficial to them. Oh, this is why we're doing this. Okay, well, let's just get into it.
Okay.
So the counterintelligence program, it was active between 56 and 71, but it's like foundations actually extend all the way back to like World War I and World War II.
It just was an international project at that point before it came home.
As soon as war starts occurring, think about it in the terms of like, as long as there's been war, there's always been espionage at some degree. You sent scouts out to gather information on the enemy troop movements and come back and report to you. Then it became more sophisticated when it was like in the World War I, you would have spies trying to be established in your different armies or different command structures. World War II, you had that even more so. We've done an episode on that. And then in the Cold War, I mean, going across the Berlin Wall and all that kind of cloak and dagger and that kind of shit. So as soon as like telephone communication and these certain avenues of communication, as they advance, it's not long before they're finding out a way to tap this kind of stuff and gather information through these services, if not knowing how to do it even beforehand.
The first step is invention, and the second step is figuring out how to help your defenses with that invention.
or to beat those defenses.
There is, yeah. I guess this is technically counterintelligence, but it just basically started out as intelligence because that's all that they were gathering during wars when you were bugging phones and all that. And then they realized
all that intelligence gathering is pointed outward, away from your nation. You're doing it for the good of your nation. You're gathering intelligence to win the war. This is what happens when all of that gets turned inward and is used against your populace.
And exposing all of that populace for really just kind of weird gains. And one of the things this one's going to be kind of tough because like when we start talking about communism and socialism and all that kind of stuff, it seems like America has been scared of communism since communism was a thing. Like they were always really worried about it. And I understand the differences between capitalist, communism, all that kind of stuff. But if they thought that capitalism was such a great thing, why in the world was everybody always so scared to try to snuff out communism before it could take hold?
Yeah, like they felt it was this great threat that if the spark caught and everything like that, it would grow into a fire. And I'm like, well, I'm not saying communism is the better idea.
That's where it's going to be tough.
I know it is, because like what happens is if you really think about it, sometimes that is the birth of better ideas, is something just advances past it. Here's my whole thing, and I probably need to do more research on this. There's like, okay, you have capitalism, which is capitalism is essentially not the form of government, it's the form of economy, or how
the economy inside the government.
But then you have communism, which is it's a combination of both the government and capitalism.
The government owns everything, and the government can disperse it equally and all that, which that's where communism fails, because we have leaders that are shitheads that aren't going to disperse anything.
And then socialism, which is an offshoot of communism,
sort
in
of
a way.
It's kind of like communism light as far as socialism. Like you still have the rights to, I guess.
But your government is trying to level the playing field. Yeah, that's kind of what it sounds like. Okay, why is it that like everyone everyone feels like it's like this one, or this one? There's like three in front of you. Isn't that the whole beauty of like the government and also businesses and everything, that if they wanted a hybrid of that you can take the positive aspects of one, get rid of the negatives, and combine them together to make it mutually better? It's a weird concept to me that like it always has to be a two-party system of government. It always has to be take your pick of these forms of economy or some shit. Like what the whole point of the Great Experiment was, they built democracy. They built the structure of democracy. They did that. We had the opportunity to do that, and we went with capitalism. But what happens when you're democracy? It evolved, and we had to make changes to it and everything. Why didn't business do the same thing where it got to evolve?
I think they did, and we tried to keep up with it
Do you think it just got to capitalism and that was the most financially beneficial for the people in charge, and they're like, we don't need to change it?
It could be a lot of that. And capitalism, free market enterprise, you have people that have ascended the ranks and gone from small businesses to large corporations, and that's great. That's the American dream. Like that's the shit that you want to do.
Yeah. Unfortunately, as crazy as it sounds, everyone wishes they pulled a Bezos. Everyone wishes they pulled a Gates and had that spark of the idea. They were the first ones, and then the first ones to follow through on it. And I'm not saying that like those guys are so big now that it's actually very scary and everything. And I like say what you want about Bill Gates, but the fact that he's donated as much money as he has, like he's understanding like I can't take it with me.
I would line my coffin with just stacks of $100 bills.
If I had that and I could set myself up for life and my kids and their kids and everything, it wouldn't take much out of that kind of fortune to do that, to have them live not even a very comfortable, well-to-do life, and then just spread that money out to like what you feel are the most noble endeavors. And see if one fucking hits, and then when you're gone, what if you potentially were the spark or that catalyst to do something that like save the planet or some shit?
We've talked about before, like what we would do with lottery winnings and that type of thing.
Half of it's already. I already have to donate. My deal is with the fates that if it happens, half of my winnings have to go to. I can spread it out however I want.
Oh, this is your deal.
Yes, but it has to be above a certain amount. So that's the deal with fate. So if my take home is like
3 million.
No, I'm not. At that point, I need that. Come on, man. Like, fate's got to negotiate a little bit. No, my deal is like, and it's even better because the more I get, the more I'm going to donate. So my take home's got to be somewhere within that 50 to 80. And then if I can take home 50, I can do everything I've ever dreamed of doing easily with 25 million invested, living off, the interest and everything, and take 25 million of that and do something for a hospital around here. Help a few, like, I don't know, the fucking homeless shelter. Like, what could you do with all that? What could you do to help even the city, like, or your state do better? Donate to the fucking, we need it for the schools. Jesus.
And that's where I don't know, obviously not having exorbitant amounts of wealth where I can start
This is getting away from us quickly.
But it's kind of a fun thought process to have. Mm-hmm. But I just don't understand maybe like how far money goes. Like we've talked about it before, and if I had like $15 million to donate, I'd go down to the hospital or like an oncology center and be like, realistically, to get like a better understanding and a better hold on cancer, what's that number? Like, is there a number that I can give you that would like put us leaps and bounds ahead of where we are now?
I think you just have to take that and you have to find where the most promising places to put that money behind is.
I don't know if I'm smart enough to figure that out.
No. You, if you wanted to do that, man, I'm telling you, there would be no shortage of people knocking on your door, trying to go ahead and point in the right direction. That's one of those things too. Is like,
how do I trust those people?
That's what I was gonna say.
It's like Brewster's Millions.
That's when you gotta try to just trust a little. I mean, of course, you're gonna do your due diligence. You're gonna have people looking out for you, but that's when you almost have to trust that humanity hasn't reached that level of shitbag where they're trying to point you in the wrong kids' cancer research direction and into a fucking scam.
Mm-hmm. Some nonprofit where everybody's profiting.
Speaking of people getting scammed,
communists.
Okay. So J. Edgar Hoover pretty much had a fucking grudge against everybody who was not a white male. He didn't have a grudge against white women, I guess.
Oh, if the rumors are true and he was gay, that's kind of a grudge against women, right?
Okay, I guess that could be. But yeah, so pretty much anybody that was trying to disrupt what he felt was the status quo within the country. Anybody, any dissension, Vietnam protesters,
civil rights
activists. It was actually COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO. It's so like, it sounds so shitty. COINTELPRO. It's just goofy to fucking say it.
Wasn't there a computer that sounded like that?
Probably.
Intel?
Yeah. Doom, 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 doom.
Oh, yeah. So that's probably why it sounds like a computer brand.
COINTELPRO was first established to root out communism from gaining a foothold in the United States. So that's how much, that's how much the government feared communism even gaining a foothold.
And they ran into some, I don't really know if you could call them like self-inflicted wounds, but a big kind of push for communism during these times when it started to kind of find its way onto our borders was the Great Depression.
And here's the thing, man. The number of people that were part of what was the name of the American Communist Party?
They were very original with their names too. They went CPUSA, Communist Party USA.
Okay. So there were only like 200,000 members of that.
That's a lot, I think, back in that time, though.
It's not that long ago, man. It's 56.
But even before that, they were, after the Great Depression, they saw it swell up to like 85,000 members. I know, but I'm
saying that like, that's a lot of fear for that amount of people. What are you afraid they're going to do? Like, you have all this faith in your form of capitalism. Like, just let it fucking destroy these guys.
That's what I think too. I find it odd that they didn't have enough faith in capitalism to snuff this out.
To snuff out 200,000 people spread throughout the country.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it was so much that they might have been worried about capitalism standing up is this is Cold War, pre-Cold War-ish kind of times. So anything...
It leads right into the Cold War. Yeah.
Anything that's happening where the USSR is gaining a foothold in our country, I'm sure was very scary because they...
essentially, it's early parts of the Red Scare where they're trying to root out anything that's even tied to
McCarthyism,
Russian ideology. I can see that. That then just say that then.
Yeah, well,
you also can make it known that you were looking for Russian spies.
They used to do these things called black bag jobs, and this was pre-COINTELPRO. This is like 40s, kind of 50s, right before.
Like COINTELPRO's daddy or uncle.
Pre-IntelPro, maybe.
Okay, there you go.
But they would do black bag jobs where they would break into these communist groups, like buildings, and they would steal the rolls of all the membership. And then with all the membership, the kind of shit that they would do just to screw with them and kind of sow dissent.
They would get people fired from their jobs.
And they would... What weird things... I guess it's not weird... But when they saw that they had like younger members, like college age members that were kind of starting to get into communism, these people would write down like, thank you for attending our seminar on communism. We're so glad to have you on the team, comrade. And then they would mail those postcards home to their houses so their parents would see them. Huh?
Did they use that term?
Comrades?
Yeah. I would imagine that would be a little too on the nose.
Well,
because they weren't trying to mimic. They just saw it as... from their point of view, it was the more favorable form.
What do you mean? Who?
The people that were part of the CPUSA.
Yeah, they did, but the counterintelligence, the FBI, was sending these postcards home to these kids that they found on the rolls, and they were writing on the outside of the postcards all these different like phrases and buzzwords and all that stuff. So the postman would be able to see, just delivering mail, that you were a communist sympathizer. Your parents would see that you're at college looking into communism, and obviously if you have a strong sense of nationalism, you're going to push back against that. So they were trying to let the public basically see that these people were not involved, but just kind of flirting with the idea.
So you know how in our country today we have essentially what people just call, it's the blanket, it's this or that. It's either capitalism or socialism. That's kind of the debate at this point. But we basically live in like a capitalist socialist country because the whole thing with socialism is it's the fire department. It is the police department. Isn't it the police department too?
Police department, fire department.
Highway district, isn't it?
Highway district, yeah. Roads, everything like that. Public schools, education. There's, you get into, what's the shit that old people get? Social Security.
So, yeah, Medicare.
All that stuff is a socialist program that has benefited billions of people.
Food stamps, when you need like assistance like that, financial assistance.
WIC.
The government even handles child support. It even offers socialism to go ahead and try to get like child support payments and everything.
Well, then in private industry too, because insurance companies are literally all just a socialist pot where everybody that has an insurance plan pays into it. Then when somebody gets hurt,
what I'm trying to get at here is you can say it's that without it being like someone being like you're a socialist. You can admit to there are socialist services that we're completely dependent on in our society. But the moment you say that in any way, shape, or form that somebody feels like it's going to take more money out of their pockets, they're like, hell no. But the structure's already in place. You don't have to pay any more for it. You can just reallocate funds from other programs and stuff like that. That's what the government's supposed to do when they see deficiencies. Getting back to that, can you imagine today if someone was like, yeah, I believe that a form of socialism can exist within capitalism like it does currently, and all of a sudden, like, your job got sent something like, this guy's a socialist, and you got fired for that. Can you imagine that today?
Not in this day and age.
Chair, by the way.
Not in this day and age, but in the 90s, in the 80s, I'm absolutely sure that there were people that got fired for being gay. I mean, before we had Don't Ask, Don't Tell, if you were found to be gay in the military, they'd just kick your ass out. Like, that's...
Would you get dishonorably discharged?
Yeah. Oh. And it's one of those things where it's not... There's a lot of different forms of the same beast. And unfortunately, I think fortunately at this point, we've kind of fought them down to where, like, you just can't do that. which is great. But at the same time, to know that there were so many angles that somebody could get fired for what they believed in, their sexual orientation, being
That would be like firing somebody
gender,
for their religious beliefs.
Which would be World War III.
Yeah.
We went through that with the bakers that didn't want to make the gay.
Oh, the gay cake.
The gay cake. Which, going through all of that in the Supreme Court and all that, I agree with their ruling. It's the company's right to do it. They're just shitty people. And
yeah, it's just here's the whole point is if there's two cake places and one has no problem doing it and the other does have a problem, go to which one you ever agree with. And then guess what? Capitalism will decide. But also, you know, I don't know.
That's, to me, we had a chance. If it wasn't J. Edgar, I would like to think that a lot of this stuff wouldn't have happened. But he kind of was the anti-gay bakery where he wanted to push the limits on everybody. And starting out with communism, if that's the biggest threat to America is communism, I get maybe wanting to find information through unscrupulous means. I don't think it was the big threat that they were as concerned about or as
No,
they
I think
thought it was.
it opened the door. If they were able to sell this, then they could sell other stuff that sounded like it was piggybacking on this or close to this or could cause something like this. By the way, you have up there that the CPUSA was 85,000 strong. I'm going to trust your number on that over mine. So
That was right after the Great Depression.
oh, okay.
So it was people that were turning against their government because they were fucked over.
When they started going after it, it might have been like around 200,000. So it was growing, but still, that's not growing by that much actually.
No, and they're sending spies into these meetings that are just sowing discontent between everybody. They're asking questions that are hot button issues that are getting everybody arguing. They're just trying to shut it down from the inside.
Yeah, and here's the thing too is the part of it that they were focused on the most, that the people that were part of the CPUSA, it was the labor rights. You're coming off the Great Depression in that scenario. All of these people have been laid off from jobs that they worked and had no protection against anything. And so they saw something that they were like, this could potentially help us should this situation occur again. Let's try to look into this.
There is hope that maybe we can be better protected going into the next job.
So again, like, if you were in that situation, have you ever been so desperate that, you're looking for something that can, like you just said, give you that hope? That shouldn't be a crime.
No, it shouldn't be a crime to look to better your situation if you are down and out.
Have you heard of Scientology? How many people get into that because something sounds good? And
I still contend that Scientology, and it's just a fact, and it's probably an age thing, but Scientology's killed less people than
Catholicism?
Catholicism.
It's killed less people than like every other religion, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so kind of crazy, less blood on your hands.
Oh,
not a Scientologist.
Let the crazy people worship their crazy stuff. I'm not against it. I just think it's very I don't think it's believable. I'm like, you guys, you went for it. God bless you, and you were able to get some people hooked in. So,
I think this was kind of J. Edgar's religion, though. I think he. I don't know if he's a spiritual man, but he had the spirit of wanting to take down anybody that was going to hurt him or his other white male buddies.
So, kind of going back to what I was saying too, about as soon as like phone systems and things like that started to gain popularity, apparently, even by 1939, the Supreme Court rules that warrantless wiretapping is illegal. So it's already been such an issue in 39 that the Supreme Court has to rule on and be like, nope, we can't do this shit anymore. And Hoover was like, well, hey guys, this is for national security that we at the FBI are going to continue to do this, so it's cool.
And what is that move? Like, it's wrong, it's illegal, but it's for national defense. Inside of our own borders, it's for national defense.
We'll make sure no one else is doing this. Part of our job will also be making sure that everyone else is sticking to the rules, and we'll take care of that.
You can't wiretap who you want unless they're a threat to us, which, if you're the one that's making up the idea to go after these people, you're going to make them sound as bad as possible.
Well, and think of, almost like the fear-mongering that probably occurred in a lot of those situations where they were having conversations about national defense when you're in those scenarios of like, hey, 39, that's pre-World War II. Even after that, with Hoover being in there, when did Hoover get into? When was he the?
He was leader of the FBI for a long ass time.
Well, so that was already, set for the wiretapping thing. But when you're talking to people during a time when you've just come off a world war, you have these national threats now from the USSR, and you're like, listen, we don't know if we have spies in our country. It would probably be a pretty easy sell, right?
I would assume so. He was in office from June 30th, 1935 to May 2nd, 1972. That is so long to be the leader of the FBI. He was the
fucking, godfather just of the FBI.
His
ran the family.
FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. He was 6 presidencies.
He had that much time just to do whatever the fuck he wanted.
Most of it was completely unchecked until the end. Robert Kennedy put up a little bit of a fight. We'll talk about that. But he also backed down at the same time. So 56 is really when COINTELPRO starts. And Dwight Eisenhower is starting to be more and more concerned about communism, like we're talking about, and he wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to affect.
Do you think that's his military mindset? Because he basically was. 100%. He was thinking, this is going to be, we can't get into another world war. This one will kill everyone.
Hey, he's seen some shit. He was over there. He knows what goes on. He was concerned.
He's like, J-Ed, do what you need to do, man.
Yeah, and I assume he probably wasn't too bummed about getting his hands dirty, as long as nobody found out. And that's what this whole thing is all predicated on, is that it doesn't get out. It doesn't leak. There's no governmental leaks that people can find out about and be like, "Whoa, is my shit wiretapped? Is my shit wiretapped?" So after that happens, they really do a number on the CPUSA. They're breaking in.
They just smear the shit out of them is all they do.
And that's their whole thing, was just not like decoys, but if they could muddle everything up enough to where people are really starting to question other people in the organization, then you start getting divisions, then you start getting other people talking, and that's when everything starts to go south.
Well, and it escalates for them too. So you see, they're kind of starting off light with the CPUSA. So they're just doing kind of a smear campaign. They're exposing people's sexual preferences to members of the, auditing party members, causing, like you said, infighting within the organization, trying to break it up from within. And you're going to kind of see where their methods get more and more severe, and they're willing to go ahead and do more, more questionable things.
To me, that's just so crazy that you would try to cause somebody as much issue as possible, that you would start feeding the IRS bad intel, and these people are getting audited every year, every couple years, every 6 months, just because they're saying there's nothing wrong here, but we don't like these people. We don't like that they're communists. We don't like that they don't believe it. So we're just going to let the IRS go after them. That's pretty messed up.
Yeah. And then so after completely pretty much destroying the CPUSA, Hoover needed another target at this point. Do you think he is just the kind of person that always has to be at war with somebody?
Always has to have an axe to grind. It's like he thinks he loses his fastball if he doesn't have an enemy.
There's no peacetime. Mm-hmm. There's only the next target.
Yeah, that to me is kind of, like I say, I think this was his religion. This was what he believed in beyond anything else, was trying to keep the status quo, but also he needed it. He needed a Joker to his Batman. He always needed an enemy, and turns out after he knocked out communism, he started going after good people instead of bad people. Which,
well, in his mindset, though, they are the bad people.
Yeah, I
know a lot. I'm not going to assume I know how much the people in charge of J. Edgar Hoover knew what he was doing or didn't know what he was doing, but you literally just saw a situation where you had at a time when he was also the head of the FBI, where in World War II you had somebody going after specific ethnicities or ethnic groups.
Yeah.
And somehow you have that in your mindset that that's still okay.
I guess that's just kind of the next logical thought.
It's not shitty places, it's shitty people is what it is.
Yeah. And that's so much of his thought process just was devoid of that. Like we fight enemies abroad, but the enemies that are homegrown, which nowadays you see homegrown terrorism, we see people that are fanatics, crazy people that are doing it, and we still have a tough time to this day saying that homegrown terrorism is more of a threat to our populace than international terrorism. But for some reason, now we can't recognize it and look at it, whereas before, terrorists were civil rights leaders, they were civil rights organizations.
It's because the government pointed you at them. The government's, we're in a situation where there's a huge portion of the populace that has some weird understanding or empathy with, I guess, that very, fanatical faction. Or maybe they don't. I don't know. It's just, it's the fewest people in the room usually scream the loudest.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, man. I just got away from this for the last day and a half, so I am. Let's not get into that part of it. But so he's going after civil rights organizations at this point, and pretty much any left-leaning liberal organizations, including Southern Christian Leadership Conference,
which is created by MLK.
Yeah, created by Martin Luther King Jr. And RFK, this is obviously when Kennedy was president. John F.
Yeah, it would have been.
Yeah.
Because RFK was his attorney general.
Yeah. So RFK is the attorney general, basically the leader of the Justice Department, who the FBI would have to go to for permission, which is strange. Why are they asking permission on this?
I think it's because they kind of had to make good faith efforts into it. Like they had to kind of do the song and dance to make them think that they were trying to do it above board.
Mm-hmm.
But after they get told no, it's like, okay, well, now we just have to be... It's kind of like they want to see how much leniency they have. And before if they get a yes...
Anyway. They want to gauge how much trouble they're going to be in by how much trepidation you have in giving your answer.
How much more covert they're going to have to go with this mission.
So he does end up... But Robert F. Kennedy does allow the wiretapping. So Stanley Levinson, he's the speechwriter for Martin Luther King, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And he had some kind of loose affiliations and ties with the CPUSA. And part of their big attack on the civil rights groups that were coming forward were they thought that this was like communism hiding behind a wall of Americans.
Like this is where communism was going to get its foothold?
Mm-hmm. They thought that it was like that communists in the USSR were controlling these organizations that were trying to bring up evil in the country, which that's a pretty far leap to go. And Levinson...
It's a fear mindset.
Yeah.
It's making those Gladwellian leaps. Like this will lead to this, and then all of a sudden you jump like 3 spaces in, and you're like, and this leads to this, and you're like, how did you connect that? It's like, it's all connected, man.
Instead of playing defense, you just want to play offense all the time.
Can I see that pen?
Yeah. So Levinson... They do kind of investigations into him, take a look at him. He doesn't really have a lot of ties, but again, it's just J. Edgar's gut feeling. Levinson understands that this is going to be, or he understands that Levinson could present this clear and present danger because MLK was rising through the ranks. He was more than just a pastor at that point. He was becoming a civil rights icon. You have the March on Washington, I think is what it was. Mm-hmm. All these people are showing up to listen to him giving speeches, and that's a scary thing for people that want to keep the status quo in America.
I see him doing the thing where he cuts together parts of speeches that would fit within a communist ideology, and he's like, listen what he said during this part. He's referring to this, Mr. President, or he's referring to this, Mr. Attorney General. He's like, I guess that makes sense. I mean, yeah.
When he says, I have a dream, do you know who sleeps? Communists. Do you know who has dreams when they sleep? Communists. Mm-hmm. Definitely communism. Just a cat that's scared of its own
white,
tail.
You Ben Affleck. It's that kind of mindset. Yeah.
You are white. They end up really... I don't know if I would call it a full blitzkrieg, but as they were paying attention to the civil rights movement, Hoover started to create lists of communists that he believed surrounded MLK and that were around these other leaders. And he knew that he couldn't publish them because if they published them, they would have to cite how they figured it out. And they can't say that they were wiretapping him to get any of this information or that they were doing these black bag jobs and breaking into these civil rights organizations and stealing their roles.
It still benefited, though, because although he couldn't release that information to the press and, like, for the free press, he could still use that information to keep furthering his own goals against the civil rights movement, because he would just then have to go, whoever needed to approve things, he could be like, this is the ties we have to all these people around him. So the information was still useful.
Well,
it was just like, he's like, oh gosh darn it, I can't ruin all these people's lives publicly. I'm still going to fuck them up, though.
But they weren't communists. Like, they were just people that, like you say, they had like one little string on them that wasn't right that he would immediately call communist. So instead of, publishing out to the masses, he starts circulating around D.C. So there's senators and members of Congress that are seeing these things. There's people that are higher ups in defense and policing that are kind of starting to be on the lookout for it. And I'm sure that was a stress that he wanted to try to put out. He wanted to put as much pressure on him as possible.
Yeah. So JFK ends up getting assassinated. That makes Lyndon B. Johnson president. He actually forces Hoover to, at that point, allocate some resources to infiltrate the KKK. Do you know how much, what percentage of the resources were allocated to fight white nationalism?
LBJ wasn't a fan of it, so probably a decent amount.
No. 16.
16 what?
16%.
Oh. That, to me, seems like a fairly big budget, though. And one of the things that we'll see...
You can't say that's just against white nationalism. That means every other thing against all these other civil rights or left-leaning groups was the other 84%.
You don't think it was spread out over other things, too? You think it was just the two things that they were going after?
It's whatever Hoover wanted it to go after.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing he's not going after his buddies or people that think like him.
Well, he was very much against... infiltrating the KKK and trying to get into that organization. He thought that
you don't say.
Yeah, he thought that was just their way of life. And LBJ finally had to be like, yo, this is what you're doing now. I understand that you hate black people and all these religious civil rights people, not religious, civil rights people. You need to go down and handle this shit because I'm trying to pass the Civil Rights Act.
That's how the conversation between I think Lyndon B. Johnson was probably like, oh, I know, Jay, that you have your... I don't know why everyone would sound like Nixon or anything like that, but he's like, if you could just, get some people into the KKK, I'd sure appreciate it.
I think he was a lot tougher on him, though, because passing the civil rights legislation that LBJ passed, he needed to start making it look like he cared about it, and he was also trying to get reelected. And so I think it was a concerted effort that he pushed him down there, and... one of kind of the hotbed things that they ran into was down in, I believe it was Philadelphia. Yeah, it's right there. Philadelphia, Mississippi in 1964. There were 3 civil rights advocates that went missing. And you've seen the movie Mississippi Burning. It's a fine piece of work. It's William Dafoe.
I know it's on that. I have a list. I have the Captain fucking America little tiny notebook.
Yeah.
Of things you should have seen in your lifetime. And I've seen a lot of shit. There's just a lot of shit new that catches your attention. But there's classic movies I haven't seen. I know Mississippi Burning is one of those.
It is a classic movie. It's just the subject matter is so tough because it's about this case.
I've never seen Shawshank from start to finish. I've watched Shawshank in so many pieces, but I've seen the full movie.
You've been able to mesh them together.
Well, yeah, if you watch TNT at any point, at any 15-year gap or anything, when they was showing on constant repeat, it was like a Christmas story. When they would show 24 hours, Shawshank was on every day.
Well, it was just so long that being a 3+ hour movie, by the time you get commercial breaks, it's 5.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
So in Mississippi Burning, Willem Dafoe and Gene Hackman played the 2 lead investigators for the FBI that go down there. And the whole movie is just so cool how it breaks down, them trying to figure out, Willem Dafoe is trying to play good cop and Gene Hackman's full-on bad cop. And what they found,
Is Gene Hackman bad racist cop?
No, he's more you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet guy.
Okay. And he's the street smart tough.
veteran.
Rookie or a wily vet.
And then you got Willem Dafoe, who's kind of more like straight-laced, try to do it by the book.
Okay.
But Gene Hackman's character ends up being the catalyst for all this to go down. I don't know. I never saw like if that's accurate to how this whole thing in Philadelphia went down. But when they went down there to investigate in the town, it was just so rampant that you could tell, like, all these characters in the movie, like the sheriff and the deputies and all that kind of stuff, you could tell that they were all very racist about it, too. And kind of what happened...
It's like when Rambo walks into that town in Oregon, and everyone is just against him from the get-go.
A little bit.
With more racial undertones.
Well, and when they're trying to figure out, like, where these three activists went, and the sheriff's like, don't know.
Happened. Yeah,
we did what we could.
Yeah.
And that was when they get better with the names, because this mission was called COINTELPRO White Hate, which kind of on the nose, but I would figure White Hot Hate might be a better...
I'm good with it.
Like, it's just burning inside of them.
Yeah.
But they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get info from local members, and the way that they would do it would be they would start bribing these guys to give them information, and not like small sums of money either, like tens of thousands of dollars for some of these guys to start flipping, to start giving out names. And after they kind of figure out who the leaders in the town are and kind of in that area of Mississippi, they start sending out mailers just like they did against the communists. And they were actually pretty cool. It was like a guy with a hood on, and they'd send them out to the Klan members. So as soon as they got in the mail, they would see it. And it was...
Start sweating them.
Yeah, it was somebody like peeking under the hood, and it's like, we can see who you are. Try keeping your hood down next time, brothers. And so it got everybody in such a tizzy that then they started looking...
It's called a fervor, Adam. It stirred up a fervor among the KKK community.
Well, and it's like they ran to him. Because as soon as they did that, everybody was trying to cover their own asses, so then they started coming and dumping off more information to the FBI.
Everyone's trying to flip on everyone.
Yeah, and luckily it ended up leading to them finding the bodies, and they figured out that sort of the story was the sheriff and the deputy sheriff were in the KKK, and a lot of the other members of the town's police force. They ended up basically letting the three escape out of the jail cell that they were in. And then they just let the Klan follow them, find them, shoot them, and kill them. And so they go through, and in the movie it says, I'm pretty sure it's accurate, but the sheriff and the deputy sheriff and everybody that committed the murders went to trial in Mississippi, all found innocent. Every single one of them, there was just ironclad evidence that this happened, like admittances that this happened. They were all found innocent. Luckily, on the federal trial, when they
appealed it.
Well,
challenge the verdict or whatever, however they do it.
Yeah, like a civil rights trial.
Yeah.
Like the national government found out that they had violated all the civil rights, and it was still like they got 7 years for every count, or like 25 years total. Like, just not a whole lot of good outcomes. But one of the most important things to kind of get from this part of it is they were paying these Klan members like large sums of money to do this. They were willing to throw more money at it to kind of try to get this information out. They weren't trying to break it up. They were just trying to get this figured out so they could report back to LBJ and say, hey, we caused some issues.
Plan's
for the
done.
KKK.
We can focus more back on the civil rights people. We're good.
And that's exactly what they did. As soon as they finished with White Hot Hate, as soon as they figured out what happened down in Mississippi, they really backed out of the KKK. They left them in disarray, but they didn't kill them like they did the CPUSA. Before we go on, I gotta pee.
Okay. All right, while we take a break from class and take care of some business, you can also take care of some business.
If you don't follow us on Instagram or Twitter already, our Instagram handle is Historically High Pod. That's Historically High POD. And our Twitter is Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right, and back to our show.
A lot of anger in the streets. There's a lot of people taking to the streets, and they see that a lot of the pushback is coming from kids that are draft age, which only makes sense because war, I think, is a necessary evil. But if you're 18 years old, 19 years old, you don't want to get drafted.
There's a big difference between... I'm trying to think of kind of the best way to. If someone was like, the world needs us, we're fighting an evil regime, we have a draft for World War II. A lot of people volunteered. A lot of people did. And yeah, there was the draft and everything. I think there's a big difference between that and being like, yeah, we're having to draft people because we're going to send you over to this tiny country where we think this kind of shit's going on, but we're not really going to tell you a lot about it. We're just going to point you in the direction, and these people are going to be killing you out of spider holes the whole time.
Oh, we're going to drop you into rice paddies.
One of those seems like you get the shorter end of the stick. You're going to war, but at least you're going for at least a somewhat noble reason.
Yeah, you don't have a lot of skin in the game. Like, if you don't go into Vietnam, you're never going to end up speaking Vietnamese. Like, there's no...
Who knew where Vietnam was? How many of these people even do you think knew where it was?
Well, and this was just that same game plan where Vietnam was just trying to stop the spread of communism.
Yes.
And
I'm sure... They're going after war protesters. Like, that's the thing. Like...
Well, and young ones at that, because one of the first kind of targets that they had was something called Students for a Democratic Society. It was a non-violent group that did form protests. They were out in the streets and doing all the normal protester things, but they hadn't committed any acts of violence. Like, this wasn't a physical threat towards anybody. This was just trying to steer the nation towards pro-war instead of having these kids out there maybe gaining a following.
It's anybody who Hoover thinks is somewhat of a threat or to his sensibility. This is his own plaything, and he just gets to point it in whatever direction he doesn't like.
Well, he's kind of got, it's like he's got a battlefield.
He's got
tanks.
carte blanche is what I think that's called.
They really started to kind of get hot at this point, going towards civil rights groups, and it was over. Did we go over the 6 years?
Yeah, so over the 6-year period, COINTELPRO placed over 758 wiretaps, while only actually disclosing less than 20% of them.
And that goes back to, I think, what we were talking about.
So they disclosed. So that would be. Let me do the math real quick. 20. So what's that, like 100? They only disclosed like 170 of them.
10% would be 73, so 146 plus.
Give or take even 10. That's still a ridiculous amount that went
unknown.
Yeah.
Well, like we were talking about before, I think this was like they were asking if they could do it, and once they found out they didn't have permission, they knew that they had to push all the rest of these underground. Because obviously, instead of listening to, hey, you shouldn't do this and not doing it, it's just, okay, well, now we have to be more secretive about it.
Yeah, we're not going to do it. Wink, wink, wink.
They had it was in 1967. After this, there was a riot in Detroit. There was a fairly large party that got broken up by the police, and police were not, obviously, they're not super nice towards ethnicities now.
Sounds about right.
Back then, it was like there wasn't any hiding it. Like, there were batons and billy clubs that were bashing people left and right. And the people had had enough of it. So this riot ends up happening in Detroit. The National Guard gets called in because the governor called them in. Over 5 days, there were 43 people killed and there were hundreds of people injured. In 5 days, there were tanks rolling down the streets. And this was separate of COINTELPRO, really. This was just something that happened that kept kind of sparking the fire more and more towards people looking towards civil rights.
It's another card in their pocket. It's just another example of why they need more reach, or why they need the reach that they need, or why they're going to do the programs they're going to do. Everything's trying to prevent this from happening on a nationwide scale.
Oh, well, yeah, if they're having to call a National Guard to try to quell this and it takes them 5 days to knock that down, what's the next one going to look like? And I'm sure that's the logic that they used in order to get to what they wanted to get. So their next project, sort of a ripoff of the first one when it came to naming, COINTELPRO Black Hate. Which, again, pretty on the nose. They targeted a lot of different groups, some of them more peaceful than others, but kind of the overarching theme was they were all pretty peaceful organizations. The SCLC, the one that King started, a pro an anti-violence
So pacifist.
movement. Yeah, pacifist movement. Thank you.
I thought that's where you're going.
Yeah. The Black Panthers at this point were also another big target. And the Black Panthers, their kind of startings and beginnings, I learned a little bit more about them through this, and I'm pretty happy that I did, because you hear a lot about the certain few members that went rogue and that would cause issues. But they were basically put into effect to help the more underprivileged people in the area that they were living in. Like, they were providing breakfast for children. They had certain different, like, they would do testing for sickle cell anemia, that the government actually copied their strategy for these sickle cell screenings that we use today. So they did a lot of good work for the community, but at the same time, they were a threat to the status quo.
How many people do you think that would never associate Black Panther, like the superhero, with Black Panthers? Because that had to be an inspiration. It's literally...
Well, yeah, Stan Lee was a huge civil rights guy. There's no way that he didn't adopt that from there. Maybe I've just never thought about the people that wouldn't associate those two things, but it makes total sense to me. Mm-hmm. I've never thought of it to the contrary. The Democratic Student Society obviously was already in their crosshairs, but they really started to come after them too. And black hate is so much different than white hate, because the way that they got information was kind of similar. Like, they would use moles and they would pay people off. Instead of paying them thousands of dollars, their highest payout was like $500 that they were giving to these people in underprivileged areas to get this information. And there's a lot of, I personally, getting into my conspirator brain, I think they caused a lot of deaths. I think they killed a lot of high-name people and a lot of very important people to these movements.
Hoover's been in charge of this thing. We're up to 67, probably closer to like the 70s, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Hoover's been in charge of this thing, you said, since 39? 39 to 69, that's 30 years. I don't think that it's like super conspiratorial to say within this time frame, with this much freedom, that he's developed programs that are able to do these types of things. Or if you're never getting checked for things that you're doing and you can get away with so many things, what's the limit of things that you think that you're not going to get away with?
Yeah.
You think you're so fucking smart because you've been in that situation for so long that there's no way that you could botch something, or there's no way something you could figure out a way to make sure that it never got tied back to you, that there was never any doubt.
And that is...
It's a fucking supervillain, dude.
It's a pretty long buildup of getting away with things to finally get to murder, but I think it's enough time to where he could have.
It's escalating. Look at everything they're doing. And it just keeps escalating.
I couldn't believe some of the stuff that I would read about. Fred Hampton was a treasurer for the Black Panther movement and was kind of involved in some other things. And they actually sent a bodyguard in, and this bodyguard worked with Fred Hampton for years. Like, became friends, got close. This guy ended up being an informant for the FBI that drew them a map of Fred Hampton's apartment, which then was turned over to the Chicago Police Department under the guise that Fred Hampton had a bunch of illegal guns inside of his apartment. And all it really was just like a scheduled assassination. Because they broke in at 4:30 in the morning to do this raid on this house. Came in, I think they fired 100 bullets and just massacred him, just killed him. And of course they didn't find any illegal guns in the apartment. Mm-hmm. So that's, I don't know if that would be considered like a hit that you would put on COINTELPRO, but I feel like we're getting towards like we're right there.
Well, how do you not connect that to it?
Because it was the police force that did it, and not a federal agency.
Where did they get the information from?
Yeah. And it was something that they turned over to the police department, so
that would have been part of the plan. Keep themselves as far away from it as possible. That's definitely tied to it.
I guess I want to try to get the benefit of the doubt, because that's a pretty, it goes without saying, that's a pretty awful thing to do. The next one, Viola Lazuso, I think was her name. Probably not getting that right. Sorry. She was murdered. She was down working for a civil rights group, And they got to a town, and the town's like, you're going to have to turn around. The KKK's here. They're hot on your tail. You need to turn tail and run. So I think they were headed back to Atlanta. They stopped off at a gas station, again got ran off, and they ended up getting run off the road by 4 KKK members. And Viola got shot and killed. And the person that pulled the trigger's name was Gary Rowe. Well, Gary Rowe worked for the FBI. And he was a plant put in the KKK. A plant put in the KKK.
So who caught them? Like local law enforcement, or
they ended up getting arrested. And when they got arrested, the FBI basically said, this guy's one of ours. He didn't do the shooting. So as soon as they say that, they're like, well, we want to question. They go, that's fine. They gave him 2 federal agents that showed up to his questioning with the local police department and basically just saved his ass from everything. All 3 of the other Klansmen marked him as the shooter. They said this was the guy that pulled the gun that killed her. And he still ended up walking while the other 3 ended up getting charged and then convicted. And after that, he ended up being a U.S. Marshal. So, like, they insulated their own guys so far to go there. And whether he pulled the trigger or not, he was still a part of that plan. And the plan may have gone awry, or it may not have. Maybe that was the plan, was to kill somebody. He was the one that pulls the trigger. Instead of them turning on one of their own, they go ahead and insulate him, they save him, they protect him, and everybody else goes down for it. That's, again, that's just, they keep getting bigger and bigger. And she probably wasn't as big a player as Fred Hampton was, but there were both 2 people fighting for the cause.
do you want to get into Martin Luther King?
Yeah, before him, Malcolm X is kind of another one that I circled, and I think it was up until last year or 2 years ago, they had 2 guys that they had captured and convicted that were in jail for the assassination of Malcolm X, but they just turned over their convictions and released both of them after like 40 years or something like that.
Based on what?
Based on not enough evidence.
So is it believed that they are the people that actually did it, or that is there evidence to state like, oh, these
they
guys
were exonerated? So they had their sentences. They got clemency or a pardon.
Well, that word is just made up. That's not time. You can't get your fucking time back.
No, and there's just these certain little things like them being released and us not knowing who assassinated Malcolm X, and the fact that Malcolm X was really big on their radar, because one of the things that Hoover didn't want was he didn't want them to have a deity. Like, he didn't want them to have somebody.
Want them to have a messiah.
Yeah, that's the better word for it.
So Malcolm X kind of ended up filling that martyr spot, and I think out of all the people that they targeted, out of all these activist groups, they targeted on Martin Luther King. And I think in one of their files when they were talking about it, it was between him and like 2 other guys, and they still focused on Martin Luther King, but they also said that the reason that everybody else wasn't behind him and all the other movements was he lacked, because he was a pacifist, he lacked the what they considered the liberal ability for violence, whereas the other 2 did have that capability. So that was kind of their reasoning why he was the biggest threat. If he turned, they believed he could have turned that on and became the threat there. They were surveilling Martin Luther King for a long time. They had information regarding at all the different hotels. He constantly traveled. That's what he was doing. He was traveling all around, mostly, I don't know how far, like, west he traveled, but it sounds like between the South and, like, D.C. and all those areas, he was traveling. And he would, a lot of these places he would stay in to speak, he would always stay in, like, the same hotels and the same hotel rooms. So they were able to kind of build up a pattern of where he was going to be. They would know his schedule, where he was going to, be staying at, where he was going to be speaking. So, I mean, they had all of this information. They were able to preemptively go into these hotel rooms that they knew he stayed in and wiretap him.
You're bugging phones, you're putting microphones in plants, just anything that you can get to catch a little bit of information. And coming from them wiretapping Stanley Levison and listening to a lot of those stories, that was probably where they thought this was going to be the best, would be on phone calls. And unfortunately, they went a different direction with it. Martin Luther King was a great dude, and I don't hold any of this against him for everything that he did. he was a little bit of a philanderer.
People are complex, man.
They are.
Like I said, there's gray, and some of the gray is darker than the other gray, and people kind of fluctuate between those areas, and they can move in and out of them throughout their lives. People are complex.
Well, and again, it's kind of that same theory of like, I didn't really care that Clinton got a blowjob. There's certain different things.
Can you separate the man from the action? Can you separate the message from the morality? Like it's.
Yeah, I don't need you to be morally perfect. I just need you to not be corrupt and not be a fucker. And King was an exemplary human being. So for his shortcomings, he more than made up for it in the positives that he did. He was a net positive on the world. And when they started zoning in and they got these recordings of the affairs, I don't know who sent the note. There was somebody under Hoover that sent King something that they called the suicide letter.
Yeah, it never actively said that word, but it was telling him that he only had one way out of this. He knew what that one way out was, and that he was going to take that one way out, or they were going to ruin his life, basically.
He was giving 34 days, which the letter showed up 34 days from when he was going to receive the Nobel Peace Prize.
Oh,
so
that's right.
Getting the Peace Prize was kind of like the end of that time. And I don't think he ever actually read it, or maybe he didn't read it first, but Coretta was the one that opened it up.
They sent multiple copies.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, and so they made sure that she would get a copy, not that like it got sent to the house, but like that it got sent to the house, but probably when he wasn't there.
Could be. So these 34 days come and pass. King gets the Nobel Peace Prize, very deserving. And I like this part. This is how I know that that King really did have a good hold on the people and he had the people's ear. Was Hoover tried to take these recordings to the press, and they just tried to say like these came from unknown sources, something like that. But he distributes out all these recordings to the press saying, look at your Messiah. He's a terrible person. He's not somebody that you should be looking up to or listening to. And the press was kind of like, dude, this isn't the big a deal that you think that it is. Like, this isn't the ace in the hole that you think you have over King. And they just refused to publish them, which I think is awesome that everybody just kind of said, no, we're not going to play these dirty games. He's not the guy that you're making him out to be. You just trying to want to knock him down. And nobody ever published anything for him. So he immediately knew at that point that I think King was a much bigger threat because he did have the backing of the media.
Yeah, so I found the letter. Should I read some of it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not that long, is it?
It's pretty long. I'm just going to read the first paragraph and then the last paragraph because it kind of gives you a sense of what's in there. So in view, King, just as King. In view of your low-grade abnormal personal behavior, I will not dignify your name with either a Mr. or a Reverend or a Doctor, and your last name calls to mind only the type of kings such as King Henry VIII and his countless acts of adultery and immoral conduct lower than that of a beast. Basically, it just goes through and tells them what it's going to ruin if they release this information, like his connections with the church and the movement and all this kind of stuff. So the end part of it is, King, there is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. You have just 34 days, in reference to the Nobel Peace Prize, to do this. This exact number has been selected for a specific reason. It hits definite practical significance. You are done. There is but one way out for you. You better take it before your filthy, abnormal, fraudulent self is bared to the nation. And
I think they said that it was written as like coming from a
typewriter,
like a black person that was in the movement. So kind of like we're disgraced by what you did, not coming from the government.
It didn't. No. When I read that, I don't know if it's because I know this before that, but it doesn't read like that to me.
No, it doesn't.
Which is probably the reason why it reads like that, because it was written by someone in fucking Hoover's office.
Written by Narc.
What would one of the Black Panthers say in this letter?
didn't think they had like 2 or 3 that they first typed up. It was like, yo, homie, or like, what's up, bruh?
You think anyone's going to go through stripping him of his titles or anything like that, of being like, I don't refer you to as Mr. or Reverend or Doctor or anything like that? Yeah, that's something to dude in a fucking suit in Langley or wherever the FBI headquarters is.
Yeah, at least slip a little vernacular in there, maybe. Call him Brother King or something like that to really make it look like it. But I personally think that, and again, back to being a conspirator, I think that the FBI had a lot more to do with King's assassination than they let on. And James Earl Ray, just kind of getting to the coup de grace of all of it, on April 14th, 1968, James Earl Ray ended up assassinating Martin Luther King in Memphis, Tennessee. And he went on the lam for a good long while. I think they picked him up somewhere in Europe.
Yeah.
Is that where it was?
Mm-hmm.
So he went up to Canada, I think, and went on the run that way.
Got a fake ID in Canada and then went overseas. And I'm trying to remember exactly. We're going to cover it in that episode, so.
Mm-hmm.
Not to gloss over that or anything, but.
No, there's more to come. But he ended up confessing to murder after he got caught. And he did that to take the death penalty off the table, which people always do. You'll always try to take that for life in prison. And then 3 days after, he completely recanted what he said. He completely recanted the confession, said, I didn't do this. This wasn't me. And he came up with this story where a guy named Raoul.
Ah, yes, Raoul.
He met up in Montreal.
You know what Raoul sounds like? Swarthy.
Yeah. He went the wrong way. He should have said he met him in Mexico if his name was Raoul. Mm-hmm. Like, you're not going to meet a guy named Raoul in Montreal. That's that's a stretch.
Hey, I'm Raoul. No.
He was just an arms dealer that supposedly recruited James Earl Ray to go on this whole escapade to assassinate Martin Luther King. And whether that's just him trying to cover his ass.
And like Raoul was there in the room. And he's the one that shot him. It was something like that he was there the whole time.
But somehow Ray's fingerprints were the only ones that were found on the murder weapon.
It was a Fight Club situation where you're seeing Tyler Durden and Edward Norton at the same time, but it's really just one of them.
Yeah. And there's a million different things that we'll get into about the assassination, just about the other theories that they kind of thought. But one of the big failings in this whole deal was they assigned the FBI to investigate the King case. Which, if he's a target of theirs, they shouldn't have been anywhere near that investigation. Mm-hmm. And the King family ended up, I think they sued in civil court the FBI after a few different things came out. I think they ended up settling for, it was a decent amount, I think. And that doesn't really matter, but there was enough evidence there to say that the FBI mishandled the investigation
or something like that. There was culpability.
Yeah, and that to me, if you're able to get that, and there's just so many questions about.
That's the thing. Like there should be no ties. Mm-hmm. If you had nothing to do with it, there would be no ties.
And if you had him as a target, you should have said, "This is a conflict of interest. We're gonna recuse ourselves from this investigation and hand it over to somebody else." They didn't. And I think that was kind of their penultimate worst thing that they did. Was
That's such a weird word.
What?
Penultimate.
I use
read
it, right?
I look at it how it's... No, I think that's how you say it. Like, I look at the word and I go to say it, and it just sounds like a gibberish word to me.
It's like, what does a pen have to do with ultimate?
Just say it's the ending. The finale.
Yeah, it was their peak of the terrible shit that they did, and this went on for a long time. From 56 to 71 is a long ass time for them to be running these covert operations. And once they slayed their communist beast, they came after the next best thing that they could think of.
So here's the thing that I think I was talking about in the first part is this kind of stuff only coming to light because the information was leaked through various means. And so specifically COINTELPRO, it was secret up until March 8th, 1971. So there was this group called the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI. And they
hell of a name.
Yeah, hell of a name.
The CCIF?
I was going to say, maybe make yourself a little less visible with the name and everything. You can still do what you need to do. What they actually did is they broke into an FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania, and they took several like dossiers and basically
800 documents they stole.
And
they grabbed everything that they could get their hands on.
And I mean, they had it planned to where they were going to do it during the night of the boxing match, the fight of the century between Ali and Joe Frazier, because they knew that it would act as kind of a cover and it would pull so many. They would be like a skeleton crew with hardly anyone there at the field office.
Everybody wants to watch the fight. It's the biggest thing going on in the country.
Agents are probably drinking, so people are going to respond. The local police are going to respond, a little slower. And through the documents that they actually gained here, they leaked them to the media, and many news organizations, they initially refused to publish the information, and the Washington Post actually ran it.
Did you hear the levels of protection that they came up with to get away with this stuff?
Mm-mm.
So after they broke in and after they took all the documents, there were 8 of them, I think, maybe 16 total.
Mm-hmm.
But they rationed out the documents between all 8 of them, and all 8 of them got in different vehicles and drove away in different directions. So that way, if one of them got picked up, they still had the majority in the other people's
Something's
hands.
going to get through.
There's no way that they're going to get all 8 of them and take all the information back. So if they could separate and they could kind of scatter, then they end up getting together and going through all the information. And this wasn't just like regular run-of-the-mill stuff. They had just top-secret information that was just kind of out there floating around in Media, Pennsylvania. Was that the name of the town?
Yeah.
Media, Pennsylvania is probably not a big bustling hub.
And there's an FBI field office there.
Yeah, like, that just seems like a stupid idea.
Like, how many places had FBI field offices that, of course, they may not have known that they were field offices, but they no longer have them? Like, how many medium-sized cities had an FBI presence?
Well, why wasn't this shit all in a safe? Like, why was it just sitting there in, like, file cabinets?
Hey, man, it's easy to leave documents just laying out in an office or
especially after they did all this black bag shit to all these other organizations. Like,
hey, man, you take some stuff in boxes, you don't know what's in there, and it was yours to begin with. I mean, come on, that happens to a lot of people, right?
Yeah, well, all you really have to do is just think about it, and then everything's okay to take.
So the Attorney General was basically telling these news organizations, don't run any of this information. Washington Post went against his request, prompted other news organizations to follow suit. It's a hot story. Other outlets are going to be like, fuck it, they did it.
Oh, yeah.
We're doing it too. And within the year, Hoover declared that the centralized COINTEL was over and that all future counterintelligence operations would be handled on a case-by-case basis. Like, oh, thanks. Thanks. So, like, all the shit that you should have been doing from, like...
Oh, now you're going to follow the rules. Right.
You can literally see within him saying that, like, COINTELPRO is over. COINTEL 2.0 is a go.
It's just like a kid that you tell him he did something wrong. He's like, I'm sorry.
He's still the head of the FBI.
Yeah. And
until what, you said 79?
Is that what we finished up with?
Okay, so
72.
70, okay.
So a year later, but that's still not a big deal. And even before that, he was the director of the Bureau of Investigations, which I'm sure was before the FBI. Mm-hmm. That was 1924. So the man's been in it forever, and he died. Oh, he actually died pretty soon after that. He died May 2nd, 1972. So
the hate that he was unable to fucking
it just built up inside of him.
Persecute minorities just fucking ate him from the inside out. He hated everyone so much that without an outlet for that shit, he just fucking imploded. So speaking of, the presidents that Hoover was in that position, or COINTELPRO was, in effect, there's a list of what specific presidents have been proven to have asked J. Edgar Hoover to gather information. So, everyone's hands get fucking dirty.
And a lot of it came out, too, I think, in the Pentagon Papers that got published after that. The ones that Nixon was so afraid of. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of information.
Well, Nixon, can you imagine Nixon knowing about this? Like, of course he did stuff.
Well, him trying to keep that secret, I'm sure, would be so hard. Like, they go into meetings, he'd be like, "Are you ready, Mr. President?" He's like, "Yeah." Like, "What do you not talk about?" He's like, "I kind of want to talk about it." Like, "What do you not talk about?" He's like, COINTELPRO.
COINTELPRO. So Teddy Roosevelt asked the FBI to put in its files the names and citizens sending telegrams to the White House opposing his national defense policy and supporting Colonel Charles Lindbergh.
Supporting him?
Oh, no, so he wanted to know who his supporters were. Because I'm guessing Colonel Charles Lindbergh was probably the voice against Roosevelt's national defense policy.
Wasn't Lindbergh the guy that flew the plane across the Atlantic Ocean?
Oh, that is, yeah. Yeah.
What the hell kind of following does he have?
He was a colonel. He was in the military. He was probably like high up in the military, man. President Truman received inside information on former Roosevelt aides' efforts to influence his appointments, like appointments of staff, labor union negotiating plans, and the publishing plans of journalists. Eisenhower received reports on purely political and social contacts with foreign officials by Bernard Burrich, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas. Kennedy administration, a little bit longer. They had the FBI wiretap a congressional staff member, 3 executive officials, a lobbyist, and a Washington law firm. The U.S. Attorney General, RFK, received the fruits of an FBI wiretap on Martin Luther King Jr., and an electronic listening device targeting a congressman, both of which yielded information of political nature.
Yikes.
Yep. President Johnson. Some of these guys are like 2-term presidents.
Yeah.
So
Johnson didn't do anything wrong.
Asked the FBI to conduct name checks of his critics and members of staff of his 1964 opponent, Senator Barry Goldwater.
Oh, that's it?
He also requested purely political... I don't know why it says purely political intelligence. So, no personal intelligence. He also requested purely political intelligence on his critics in the Senate and received extensive intelligence reports on political activity at the 1964 Democratic Convention from FBI electronic surveillance. Johnson is a little dirty.
All he was
This
Johnson's
got some rust on it.
He might have just been looking for naked pictures of these guys' wives or something.
It burns this Johnson a little bit when it pees.
That it definitely did, I'm sure.
Nixon, his is short, but it's just the points of it because we know what he uses for.
Well, and Nixon went on after this. This all ended during Nixon's reign.
Yes. So authorized a program of wiretaps, can't even get specific because it's an entire program, which produced for the White House purely political then why does it say purely political or personal information unrelated to national security, including information about Supreme Court justices? So, I mean, is this one of those things where when you do get into office as the president and you find out what's really available, what's really at your disposal, you find out the scary shit, or you find out the people giving you the information know how to play you. And so they're like, we have this tool that we can find out the people who, are against you and can make things, difficult for you to try to achieve these noble goals. We can get information just to make sure that they're not roadblocking you or anything like that. Can we go ahead and do that? Well, yeah, I mean, it's for the good of the nation. Yeah, of course it's this benefits everybody, even them. They just don't know it.
I think Edgar was just a good pet to have because he was going to go whichever way the wind blows, whether it's a conservative or a Democratic president.
If I'm going to have this dog, I need to have it on a leash. I can't have this dog running loose.
Well, and I think it was more of he was an outside dog that would do whatever he could to stay outside. Whoever needed the intelligence, because it sounds like most of that shit was just going against their political opponents. So if he's like, oh, yeah, we'll allocate 5% of our resources to find dirt that you want, just let us have the other 95%. It's like, okay.
You got any tinfoil in here?
I don't need it.
Okay. J. Edgar Hoover is... The FBI is his personal thing. Okay. Do you think that he was able to have this control and oversight, or lack of oversight, essentially, because he had information on his bosses?
Yeah, everybody does that. That's the thing. And going back to, or maybe forward, either way, when we were talking about Larry Flint, he kind of did the same thing. Anybody that he worked with, he always wanted to have dirt on them. Because the more dirt that he had on the people that he was doing business with, the better, stronger hold that he had on them. So I have no doubt that Hoover probably had a wiretap or something in the White House to listen in on this shit.
Mm-hmm.
And every time they said no to whatever he was doing and tried to quash it out, he could always be like, yeah, that's funny, man. You remember that June 10th meeting that you took when you were talking about that?
But I mean, he would have people probably following political dissenters, the president, members of Congress, trying to get dirt on their like fucking proclivities and all that kind of stuff.
I don't know how tight the FBI and the Secret Service are, but I'm sure there's a little overlap there that he could have got information from those dudes too.
Like all of this is on the table. All of this is very realistic.
Anybody that searches this much information out and is looking to do this much harm is definitely always going to have like a plan B. They're always going to have a card up their sleeve to deal with who they need to deal with.
Well, and here's the thing too. Like, is it comforting like that this program ended? It not really. Okay, first of all, it wouldn't have come to light had it not been the documents not been stolen. The other thing is, they just changed the name. Like the file on the computer, you ever just fucking, right click on a desktop file, there's a rename, you backspace, and then you name it what you want to name it?
Sure.
That's all they do. That's all they would do. Like, where's the oversight? Like, what happened? I understand that Hoover was out a little, a couple years after this program ended.
Right after he died.
What, with the Edward Snowden thing, with the release on all of that information about surveillance and going through, this stuff just gets put under a different name.
Yeah, I like to, and this is just trying to be the optimist, I like to give places like the FBI and the CIA a little credit that they have the greater good in our...
I think more so now, but here's the thing is, there's no civilian oversight at this point.
No.
Like, there's people like whistleblowers that will actually bring this stuff to light that have tried to root out the bad parts and the corrupt portions of these.
You don't think that there's like a tiny bit though that they've figured out how to duck and dodge enough to still have these covert deals?
I'm sure there are, man, but here's the deal. Like, and you can talk to this about anything. There is no organization, there is no friend group, there is no business, there is no team that does not have a negative, does not, that is not the bad apple in that. We see it all the time, but we want to use that example as, let's go ahead and label everything.
Well, I think it's justified to question intentions currently of secret services like the FBI and these kind of places because we've been burned in the past.
Yes, of course.
I would like to think with the way that you're saying, like oversight and everything like that, like we've hopefully rooted out 99% of this shit. And
when this stuff comes to effect and comes to light, yes, I would hope, maybe it's the optimist in me, that checks would be put into place where there would be, patches on the leaks. You wouldn't just let a broken system stay broken. Like, if you don't have, of course you need to question things. I'm not saying don't question things, but just to get through your fucking day, you have to have a little bit of optimism that the things that are supposed to keep running will keep running.
It's okay. Yeah, it's okay to have a healthy distrust of the government and their agencies. But then the logical mind also has to kick in with that distrust to say there's too many things going on right now that these people aren't doing this. Like, this is an actual issue that they're dealing with.
But when there's no oversight and there's no checks or balances, this is the kind of thing that happens.
But this is where those checks and balances came from, is stuff like this, where they got their nuts put on the table and then smashed with the hammer, and now they have to try to either go deeper or just fucking stop breaking the law.
Did Hoover leave of his own accord, or did he get the boot, or was he one of those situations he's like, you're fucking out, but we'll allow you to say it's your idea?
Bow out gracefully.
Yeah. Do you think it was that due to your years of service?
We're gonna tender your resignation, but you can do it. Let's see. That's interesting. Excuse me. I would assume that he had to have been pushed out.
Pushed, but not actively terminated.
Removed.
Who was president? So that was during Nixon. So that's when. How much of this do you think? This was in 71.
Shit.
What?
Hoover remained director of the FBI until he died of a heart attack. So God took him out. Yeah, he died in his Washington home on May 2nd, whereupon operational command of the bureau was passed on to Associate Director Clyde Tolson. So he was still in charge of the FBI all up until he died. Which, after all this shit comes to light...
Thank God for that fucking heart attack.
Yeah, that heart attack was a big player. That was a good move.
Because had he known he was going to be leaving, that gives him the opportunity to place someone in position to succeed him that's going to be keeping it in the same direction.
Well, we can't expect Nixon to try to shut down and kick out some dude that's running counterintelligence.
No. The other thing too is, do you think that maybe once Hoover died, if Hoover would have been in the position to protect both Nixon by protecting himself, kind of I'm good. Do you think without Hoover there, it kind of took it's fine. Took a piece off the board for Nixon to try to fix the whole Watergate situation?
Like Nixon dying or Hoover dying was
he didn't have that ace up his sleeve.
Nixon was just pissed that he died because he couldn't help him anymore. Mm-hmm. He couldn't be the back door out of it. Yeah, they were kind of cut from the same cloth. So it seems like it would be beneficial to have Hoover there to try to cover shit up.
Yeah.
But I don't think anything was going to save Nixon. So.
Well, this makes me feel good.
There's a lot of things in U.S. history that I don't know if they get passed over or people just kind of look at things at a surface level.
What's nuts is this isn't even conspiratorial. Yeah, we touched on a couple things that might be considered, fringe conspiracy, but all of this has been revealed to be accurate and true. This isn't just oh, did you hear about COINTELPRO? Oh, that's a whispered... No, it's actually a thing that happened.
Yeah, we had MK Ultra that dosed people with acid. We had COINTELPRO that was running international espionage against American citizens.
Has anyone ever been given authority and no oversight and it turned out well? Oh. We haven't really... I mean, Alexander had no oversight, and he just kept trying to fucking conquer places until it killed him.
And he just kept pushing himself to see how far he could get.
Yeah.
That's it. We never really learned
Is
about...
Is it ultimate power corrupts or absolute power corrupts absolutely?
Yeah, that's... if you don't have any oversight, if you don't have to answer to anybody, you're going to try to push the limits if that is your personality. I just kind of had this fleeting thought. Did you ever learn about anything semi-conspiratorial in school?
No.
There wasn't.
And that was all the fucking not even the conspiracy stuff, but the heart. You know what? This is gonna hurt to hear, but it's fucking factual. Can you not? Here it is. You're not asking what someone wants to learn. You're putting it in front of them, and you're saying you learn this.
You think teaching stuff like this and MK Ultra would be teaching them to question the information that they're given?
Yeah. It would.
So that's
it
why
would
it's
make
not
them
taught?
It would make them less compliant, I guess. What happens as you get older? You become less trustful. You become more questioning. That just happens as you get older. If they're able to, they already know that's going to happen, but why are they going to go ahead and jumpstart that? Maybe some people never get to that point and they never, have that thing. They're why is this that way? But so they're not going to go ahead and jumpstart that or give anybody any ideas. I would love to fucking sit in on a discussion or a forum on how you select curriculum to teach kids.
That's a slippery slope though, because I think we're seeing that now from people that are doing that same thing too. But theirs is more based
that's what
on
I'm saying.
Personal opinion.
That's what I'm saying. That's why this stuff does not get taught or even mentioned. Is because that curriculum has been selected by people
that just want to keep it down the guardrails.
Yes, it's bumper bowling, dude.
Yeah.
We're not going to let you get anywhere near the gutter. We're just going to keep you nice and centered as we can. It's bowling with bumpers, and then the little thing that looks like an old lady's walker that toddlers use to drop the ball. I don't know why this comes to my mind so much, and I think it's just whenever we start talking about King,
But I remember in 8th grade, the teacher that I had when we were talking about Martin Luther King Day, I remember asking her, I go, wasn't Martin Luther King on the list of America's Most Wanted? And she kind of looked at me for a second and kind of turned her head. And she goes, well, yeah, but it's not really for the reasons that you would think. And I just remember saying, well, like in my black and white child's mind, I was like, but if the government wanted him, he had to have done something bad, right? And
you don't get on that list unless you're a bad person.
yeah, through all the drugs and alcohol that I've thrown at my brain, though, I still remember this moment, and I still remember this happening, and I remember the look on her face, and I remember her like kind of fighting like with that inner monologue, like I really want to like set this kid right.
Is this kid gonna go home and say something to his parents if I lay some shit on him right now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like she's trying to weigh like her job and how dumb I am.
Yep.
To
if teaching is if that's your thing, I love talking about this stuff. Like, I love us just bullshitting back and forth. If I was able to, and I love talking, like, I'm going to love, like, talking to, like, my kid about just, like, history and cool shit and comics and all. But what I'm saying is, like, if you're passionate about something, you want to, like, do that as well as you can. And sometimes that means, I'm not saying the teacher should do this or anything. I'm saying it sucks that, like, you can't even talk about, like, true factual things. That those are somehow off limits because they're ugly or because they're regretful or anything. Well, yeah, like that's called life. Like no one goes through life without any regrets, but like the country is a life and it goes through the same type of shit. But what do you do as a person? If you make a bad decision and you do something, you're smart enough to know not to do that again because you are reminded that information is with you from doing it. If you don't share the information, it leads people down a situation that's already occurred, but it has a negative result.
Yeah, and you can't, like, you have to weigh the benefits of sharing that negative result with a young mind. And just thinking about, like, what you were talking about, could you imagine how depressing it would be if you were in, like, 8th grade and you got the whole, like, world of politics and everything laid at your feet? You'd just be like, what the fuck, man? I was just thinking about passing a note during lunch, and now you're laying this shit on me?
That's why they don't do, I don't know if high school still does or even does the class, but it was for us. It was government. That was the name of the class, and it was the class that was assigned to you that you had to take as part of your senior year. So they waited till you were at that point, and even then, government wasn't about. It was exactly what you would expect. It was learning about the government, not how it actually works. Where maybe the term lobbyist came up, but it was a very scarce definition.
Skimmed over very quickly.
Yes, it didn't explain like. So you never made the connection of like, what companies would need lobbyists? Every company would need lobbyists. Even companies I don't like have lobbyists. What a lot. So they just talk to the people and like they're really good at talking. No, they have fucking money, and so learning about that. I'm not going to say it's going to make you distrustful, but what it's also going to do is like, how many people do you think? I know we're kind of going on a tangent here, but you guys can stop this if you're here for COINTELPRO. Have a lovely evening.
Nailed it.
But how many people, if they learned about government and how you can find your way into that, because isn't that one of those things like that seems sports even seem attainable as a kid? Positions of government, those don't seem attainable because it's always really old people when you saw them as a kid, and you're like, well, then I can't even get into that position till I'm old. So why am I even going to think about it now? But like, imagine being in a high school, teaching a high school class and being like, did you know that you can start being or participating in like city council at like, I think it's 18.
Yeah.
You can start participating as a counselor. You can start doing good around your community and you can work your way up. All of a sudden, you're now a state representative. You can do that for the right reasons if you're inspired by it. We've also seen some examples of some people being in that position that did it for the wrong reasons. And it's like, now what that's going to do is that ruins it for anybody that wanted to take that chance when they were younger and try to push. They're always going to be compared to that person for a while. That's good. They're going to have to work out of that person's hole, even though they might be the right person for the job. They got to work out of these shitty people's hole now.
Surface level, when you look at political positions and from like a younger age, you only see like the grace of it. You only see that you have to be intelligent and that you want to know that the smartest people that you know are going to be making the decisions for you.
Are you even ever aware as a kid that there's anything less than down the totem pole than like the president, Congress from a national level, and then all of a sudden you learn, you're like, oh, our state has our state has things where we have
a Senate and a House of Representatives in the
state to make rules, and then each city has its own form where like big cities have like mayors and city councilors, and they make the rules that were within there's all these other what the fuck.
Yeah, even moving down to the people in the government that hand out
comptrollers.
Yeah, and the people that have to write, I don't know why this word escapes me, but like permits, like the permitting office to like build onto your house or anything like that. Like government controls all the way down to the fucking people that give you licenses. Like that's all government.
Yeah.
But I think when you're young and you see like all the things of like the heroism and being smart and all the redeeming qualities you want in a politician, and then when you become old enough to realize like that's been your dream for 20 years, and then you realize that it's more of a moral conundrum to try to go into politics because you will always have to deal with somebody that's corrupt.
I think it's a constant battle of compromise when you're in your head and like, what? I need to get something done. I got to get something done. What am I willing to give of myself or to essentially kind of sell myself? What's my line? And I can never cross that line. And some people are just like, I don't have the line. If it tries to let me do what I need to do or stay in this position, I'm going to have no line and I'll say whatever.
How far down the political prostitution totem pole do you want to go? Like, are you everything's off limits? Are you willing to give a handy to get some shit done? Are you willing to blow somebody? And can I still maintain
any credibility for that shit? Yeah.
And you got to go home and look at yourself at night after you do that shit too. That's just I used to think that being either like a government official or something like that would be great, until I ran into that moral conundrum of being like, oh, this isn't just trying to be smart and know all the rules. This is like how far you're willing to wager your self basically to get things done. And it's a dirty game and it's not a fun game to play. And I don't know. That's how we end up with the politicians that we do though, because you have to be such a megalomaniac to want to do it and to know like, okay, all the people that you want walk away because they don't want that moral conundrum, and all the people that you don't want are like, yeah, sell me. I don't care.
It puts you in an echo chamber.
Rough.
All right.
Life.
Well, hopefully that didn't depress anyone.
Yeah, peace be with you.
All right. Well, you got anything else?
No, we're good, man.
All right. Later, guys.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.